March 21st. That's the date Indian Pharma has been circling for months. Semaglutide, the molecule behind Novo Nordisk's Ozempic and Wegovy, loses its patent in India this week. Over 24 Indian brands are expected to be launched by generic drug makers. A monthly dose that roughly costs 10,000 rupees today could drop to 3,500 or even less. In a country with over 100 million people living with obesity and 136 million in the pre-diabetes range, the stakes couldn't be higher. But this is no copy-paste moment. Cold chains, complex peptide manufacturing, and patient adherence will separate the serious players from the opportunists. Also, there are safety issues. Court cases have been filed to discuss misuse of weight loss drugs. In this episode, we have 5 people who know exactly what that means. Listen on, it's Thursday, the 19th of March. I am your host, it is Pharma editor Vikas Dandekar. This is the Morning Brief. Thank you so much, all our speakers. I'll make a quick introduction. We have Ms. Sheetal Sapale, Vice President, Pharmarack. She has been doing all the number crunching for several years. We have Dr. Saurabh Jain, Vice President, Global Delivery Centers of Indegene, again, a company which is deep into data crunching and has been advising global companies on their market strategies. We have Dr. Rajiv Kovil, a name we have seen as synonymous with expertise in diabetes and weight management. We have Mr. Saurabh Agarwal, Director, HAB Pharmaceuticals and Research, again, a company which is doing a lot of work on semaglutide, both in injectables and oral formats. And Dr. Vijay Charlu, President of Domestic Business at Corona Remedies, again, a company which has been really growing very well over the last decade. My first question will be to Dr. Rajiv Kovil. 21st March is when we are going to see an explosion of generic versions. Nearly every company that we have spoken to are actually gung-ho, excited. Almost all of them say they have something unique to present. Pretty confusing the way we are actually seeing the things panning out right now. Tell us if you are also as confused as we are.
So, not confused. First, semaglutide is actually the statin movement for obesity. It's robustness of data. It's very guideline driven, and we have to realize it's for long-term use. And the winner in this market will not always be the first mover, but those who can actually scale and access responsibly. It has the potential to actually democratize metabolic care, because right now, metabolic care is expensive. And there is a lot of aspiration from patients across India that we want to use the best possible care available globally. And this aspiration has come post-COVID, where people realize that, things can suddenly start going wrong. And that's where the positioning of semaglutide, not just as an anti-obesity drug, but as a drug which can actually transform diabetes care in our country and metabolic care in our country. Because it's just not obesity or the percentage of weight loss, it's the outcome-driven data that semaglutide has, which can actually change the metabolic complications in our country. So whether it's an MASLD, whether it's a CKD, whether it's cardiovascular disease in people with diabetes or without diabetes, heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, osteoarthritis, peripheral vascular disease. There are so many metabolic complications which are driven by obesity, and which type 2 diabetes is one. That movement has come that people now change and make sure you are able to evaluate patients in a more holistic manner, and then treat patients based on risk factors rather than numbers.
Right. So you started on a very important note that this is probably the statin moment for metabolic conditions. Given the point that we are actually in, Do you think, Dr. Kovil, the treatment standards will also change? Do you think we will still kind of deliver care in the same way that we have been doing? Or do you think GLP-1s will probably be started early on?
I think the change is expected. And why I called it a statin movement is that this is an anti-obesity, anti-diabetes drug which went into anti-obesity. But it caused a 20% reduction in major adverse cardiovascular events, which is almost two-thirds of what statin did as secondary prevention trials in the 90s. Most importantly, we have always had this debate that which should be a first injectable in patients with diabetes. And always it used to be insulin till the last 7 to 8 years. But today, with the data that semaglutide has, especially when we look at people, majority of our people who are overweight and diabetes have 50 to 60% have MASLD. Our people with diabetes have around 35% have chronic kidney disease. People with diabetes, 25% have established cardiovascular disease. People with obesity, out of which almost 30 to 40% would have other metabolic disorders, and maybe 40 to 50% may have diabetes. That's a huge group of people who are
Uh-huh.
not being treated as per indications globally. So I think when the cost comes down and people start treating based on risk stratification, then the GLP comes much, much higher on in the prescription and in our flowchart. That's going to change, I think.
So from here, I'll go to Dr. Saurabh Jain. Dr. Jain, you've seen both sides. You are a doctor and you've also advised companies on important product launches globally. What do you think will be the differences when you actually look at the Indian market from your experience? How do you see, the kind of regulatory restrictions that have also been put in place now? Almost every company will be looking at doing their best in terms of reaching the doctors. So your take on that?
So, because this is a very interesting point, as Dr. Kohli was talking about, we are seeing the one originator is already a number one molecule right now in the country. There is a difference between the global market and India market. We are talking about one originator, one brand, one molecule, and we are talking about a generic market where there are going to be multiple brands which is going to be marketing the same molecule. But I think one of the key aspect, if we have to look at from the global aspect, patient is going to be one of the major stakeholder over here. How pharma companies are able to engage patients, educate patients in this particular therapy is going to be the key. Now, we see government has come with a new regulation over there that how we can use the mass media and all to reach out to the patient. But patient education, running the patient adherence programs, patient support program, identifying the right segment of the patient where the therapies can be started, I think is going to be the key strategy for the pharmaceutical companies over here. We have seen globally, because it's an injectable, because it's a long-term therapy, we have seen more than 50% of the patients drop out within the first year in these therapy. So I think effective patient education and adherence program is going to be the key for success for most of the pharma companies over here.
Great. That's a very important insight you brought in.
Okay, Sheetal, coming to you, how do you really see the market panning out post March 21st?
Okay, so the anti-obesity market has been actually shaped up very well by the launch of tirzepatide and semaglutide. In fact, in the last 1 year, the market has jumped from a 100 crore market in 2022 to almost 1500 crore market, and which is a huge jump that we are seeing in the market. And typically, what we have seen is when the drugs go off patent, the price comes down to 1/3 to 1/5, and the volumes per month they rise to 2x to 3x time. Most of the companies have been quite secretive about what is going to be the pricing. But even if I say today on an average, if the cost is around 10,000 rupees, it may go down to around 3,000 to 4,000 rupees, which makes the goods or the products quite affordable. So applying just a simple maths and multiplication, the market is actually going to reach or cross almost 6,000 to 8,000 crore turnover by say 2030. I have two reasons for this. One is the semaglutide injections, they will become affordable, and there will be some amount of share that Mounjaro may also lose because of this. Number two is over a period of time, what we are also seeing is there will be newer generations of GLP-1s or combinations of GLP-1s with GIPs or glucagon antagonists that will be launched in the country in the next 3 to 5 years. They will be coming at a premium price, but all these factors together will be driving the growth of the market. Today, per month consumption is around 2 lakh units, 1.5 to 2 lakh units that we see, the latest. So that may move up significantly in the next 2 to 3 months.
Oh, that's a very interesting trend because initially we had seen Mounjaro really picking up momentum in a big way and semaglutide actually lagging quite far behind. So that has already started to change a little.
Yeah, a significant change. In fact, we have seen post this almost 37 to 40% price reduction that Novo Nordisk had taken for their set of products, Wegovy.
So Saurabh Agarwal, what do you think will companies do differently? Because there are just so many of them. And how will they stay in the market and make an impact?
Everyone's talking about a number of new entrants, but I feel pricing and execution will be the real differentiator. Recent developments like the Eris-Natco partnership and multiple companies preparing launches shows that the entry barrier is reducing, but the execution barrier remains high. Semaglutide is not a simple molecule. It's a complex peptide. The injectable format involves cold chain distribution, which we know in India is not very easy. And it's not a simple drug. It's a drug and a device integration. So our strategy is to build a CDMO platform where we are able to, manufacture a high quality device drug combination. And at the same time, we have our own product portfolio where we'll have a low cost, a generic version available in the market. I definitely feel over time, the market will consolidate and execution-driven players will create space.
Right. So actually you spoke about the Eris-Natco deal. There is also a deal which we are just reading between Zydus and Lupin. So even the large players are actually looking at whatever ways in which they can collaborate. Never in our Indian pharma history have we seen anything of this kind where large companies are also coming together. So again, I want to go back to Dr. Kovil. Do you think there will be sufficient room for all the companies to have some play, given that, we have a big population here? Do you think doctors will really prescribe products from companies which are small? What would be the influencing factors?
I think first and foremost, I agree with Saurabh there that, it is just not a copy-paste drug. It's not a small molecule. It's a very long chain peptide. And it requires a lot of back end in terms of cold chain maintenance, a lot of good distribution. So a lot of Indian players, other than Lupin and Eris, have not been in the injectable space. The Indian companies have always been in the branded generic space, So from that perspective, the execution is going to be a little bit it's going to be not as easy. And if the product is very good, I think the doctors are getting ready to prescribe this product to a larger group of patients. The first GLP-1 came into India somewhere around 2006. So a lot of people and especially patients feel that this is a new molecule or a new family. Semaglutide was launched in 2017. So it's 9 years of experience. And GLP-1 has been there in India for the last 21 years, almost 21 years. Now, with the cost coming up, the market expansion is surely going to happen. More importantly, I think our doctors need to change that the patient needs to be evaluated better. And there is a lot of hand-holding when we are prescribing GLP-1 because a lot of side effect profile needs to be explained. A lot of mitigation of risk needs to be explained. How to inject needs to be explained. 15-20% of patients are going to experience some side effects.
Right.
So the conversation with each patient is going to be a little longer. So that is something that the doctor also needs to consider. And from the industry standpoint, I think cold chain maintenance, distribution, accessibility and availability is very, very of paramount importance because 50 brands are not going to stay. Max 5 brands will stay at the end of 6 months.
That's a great point, Dr. Kovil. Sheetal, how do you react to this?
Yes, that is something which usually happens every time. Many people are, or many companies are very enthusiastic in launching brands, but then you really need to have a very strong marketing strategy to ensure that you make the most of patent opportunity. It's like there are 40 companies, but relatively stronger ones appear to be Torrent, Intas, Lupin, USV, Eris, and Corona, because their dependence on chronic segment is more than 70%. 70% of their portfolio belongs to the chronic subchronic segment. So they are relatively stronger players in that segment.
This is a question on adherence. How do you think patients will react? Because a lot of patients have actually dropped out of the treatment.
Dropouts are happening because the side effects are not getting managed properly. The lighter side effects that we see for these drugs are simple things like nausea, vomiting, whereas a little stronger side effects that we see are pancreatitis or, stomach issues, stomach paralysis. So not everybody can take these set of products. So titration of the dose is very important. What we have seen, or when we have talked to certain pharma companies, is some patients, they just ask for a prescription for some wedding or some event, just to have losing some kilos very fast. They are really not the eligible patients. Or if it is you're just 100 kilos, coming down from 100 kilos to 80 kilos, you really don't require an injection. So that eligibility of the patient is very important, and side effect management is very important. And when the patient goes to a obesity specialist or a cardiologist, diabetologist, these are super specialties who can manage the side effects. But then if you go to a doctor who cannot manage the side effects, then it is a problem.
So, Dr. Kovil, we've spoken about the massive campaigns that companies have launched and the awareness programs that they are building at airports, at places that you don't even expect medicine, surrogate ad to be put. Do you think it is actually creating the kind of awareness, or people are just going and taking it or misusing? Because I have myself seen a homeopathy doctor actually in a big way doing a kind of campaign for weight loss. So do you think those risk factors are also being explained to the patients and it's not being misused?
So most importantly, anti-obesity drugs are not for billboards or social media or TV ads. You are actually trivializing the years of peptide science, precision manufacturing, and clinical evidence, and you are just giving aspirations to patients who may or may not need the drug. That's where the problem lies. You have a specific guidelines which are given for using the drug. I think it has to be a prescription driven market where the doctor needs to evaluate, and especially experts need to evaluate whether the drug is required. Does the patient fit the criteria for the drug? Does the patient have comorbidity, and what are we trying to treat at the end? This is not a cosmetic weight loss drug. It's a drug for long term chronic weight management and diabetes, and for comorbidity and for organ protection.
Absolutely. No, so here is where I actually want to have a quick word from Dr. Saurabh Jain. Even in the US, we have seen the compounding pharmacies actually looking at GLP-1 drugs, and we've seen examples of Hims and Hers, selling GLP-1 drugs. Do you think there are sufficient safeguards maybe across the world where misuse is actually being prevented?
No, I agree. There have been misuse, and there are going to be some misuse. And I think as a responsible marketing pharma companies, we need to make sure how we can minimize that misuse. And these are the safeguards which has been followed globally, right? If we see the broad base, we might be having around 1.1 to 1.2 million physicians, which could be a right target for pharmaceutical companies for this kind of drugs. So we need to make sure that which is the right doctors, which is the right tier 1, tier 2 cities, maybe around 1 lakh doctors all across the India would be the right target for this, which would include your diabetologists, endocrinologists, physicians, and maybe some of the GPs in tier 1, tier 2 cities. Close alignment with the regulatory guidance, right, which has been followed in India and globally, along with the medical affairs team oversight is going to be very, very important. There is going to be a lot of chances of over prescription, over medication with this. We need to how clear our marketing strategies are there to avoid that. That's going to be happening if we have a evidence-based communication, which is going to be included. I think those are the strategies. Now, we have seen in generic market, many of these things have been avoided, right? Many of these things is a very price sensitive market. We generally focus more on the pricing rather than focusing on many of these things. I think for a drug like GLP-1, semaglutide and other things, we need to focus a lot on communication, physician communication, patient communication, and all these factors which I talked about.
Sheetal,
Right. So my next question is to both Dr. Vijay Charlu and Saurabh from HAB. So, Dr. Charlu, the way we have seen companies speaking about semaglutide opportunity, they actually have a lot of global plans as well. And some of the companies have actually spoken about markets where we don't associate weight loss drugs, like Africa. Would you like to throw some light on that, on exactly how you see the global opportunity? Do you also have plans to go to Africa? So first to you, Dr. Vijay Charlu.
So, Vikasji, if you see the entire business of Corona Remedies, we are 97% domestic and 3% international.
Right.
And as a company, we are very, very focused on the domestic formulation business and prescription market. And if you see semaglutide as a drug, we're not going to take it helter-skelter everywhere, and we're going to be niche in our promotions to the specialists who actually are, where the indications are approved. So with semaglutide, the indication approved is with CV events, it's approved with obesity, it's approved with CKD, and it's also approved with type 2 diabetes and NASH. So these are the indications where we are going to be focused upon, and we are not going to be focused upon any other indications. So that becomes very clear as far as a mandate is concerned in the domestic markets. We will be predominantly domestic focused initially, and then probably look at the international markets at a later stage.
Right. Saurabh Agarwal, your take on approaching the global opportunities. You've spoken about oral doses also.
Definitely. So we are looking at Africa to start with. Africa represents a strong opportunity due to the rising diabetes there. We are currently present in a lot of countries in Africa. So our existing presence allows us to expand in a structured and responsible way. At the same time, I believe that building a cold chain infrastructure for the injectable format is a big challenge, because of which the oral format might do a bit better to start with, and later the injectable format.
Right.
I believe Africa is a market that already is buying a lot of the innovator product. They're buying it via Europe and via the UAE and via other countries, because the innovator also hasn't launched in many of those countries. And at the same time, you can hear stories about a bunch of Indian companies ready to launch in Canada, in EU. So they will definitely reduce the price. They will offer a similar quality. Margins for exports are much higher than India, and domestic margins are tight, as everyone here will agree. So I believe exports is a huge opportunity for this.
Yeah, I have exactly heard the same thing, that, in Africa, your prescriber base and the connections with the doctors is very important. And yet there are fewer players, which probably comes as a very big opportunity for Indian companies. And so there are definitely pockets to be explored. So again, I'll go back to Dr. Kovil here. So here is a point. Lots of companies are actually saying they are also working on the oral versions of semaglutide. Rybelsus is already there from Novo Nordisk. Do you think it will run in tandem, or do you think there will be separate opportunities for companies to explore the injectable bit and the oral bit?
I think back-end capability is more important than front-end marketing. As far as I remember from science, oral semaglutide is even harder to make than an injectable, because it's not just the peptide, it's also the delivery technology, the snack that makes it work.
Yes.
And so oral semaglutide is going to be much more difficult to make, both the chemistry and the delivery science. I believe one or two players are there who are trying to mimic that. Having said that, we have 15 to 20% of our patients even today who are reluctant to take an injectable product for diabetes or for obesity. So there is a huge need that we should have a good oral semaglutide available in the dose for obesity also. But having said that, the technology and the absorption enhancers and everything seems more difficult than making an injectable semaglutide, I believe.
Right. So the brief background to that is like even Novo Nordisk had to struggle quite a lot for many years, and then they had to actually take the partnership with Hemisphere to do the bioavailability bit. It was very difficult. So to kind of pack the power of injectable peptide into oral has been a very big challenge. You're right, sir.
Right.
I'd like to jump in on that.
Please do that.
So the injectable format is just a 0.25 or a 0.5 mg dose, whereas the oral format is a 7 mg to a 14 mg dose.
Yes.
So the costing of the oral format is multiple times the injectable format, and which is surprising. Normally, an injectable is more expensive, but in the case of semaglutide, the oral tablet is around 5 to 10 times more expensive than the injectable. And that is one of the biggest challenges as well, that the oral format is not affordable.
Absolutely. No, but at the same time, here's where actually I'd like to have Dr. Kovil come in. We have Lilly preparing for orforglipron, which is a non-GLP-1, a small molecule. Hopefully, we'll probably see the launch coming up this year or maybe early next year. So do you think that will also change the way we are seeing the GLP-1 invasion?
Orforglipron per se is a non-peptide small molecule. So in principle, it's easier to manufacture than peptide drugs like semaglutide. So which is much more complex. So orforglipron has a huge scope for scalability and manufacturing. And I believe they've got a very big manufacturing center in Switzerland. That gives them a huge advantage to have global access, and probably the rates may also go down because the scalability is huge. I think once they come in, I think it's one of the biggest molecules that we are looking at. Having said that, the recent head-on study, in spite of being a non-peptide GLP-1, they had more GI side effects with better HbA1c and weight reduction. So only time will say, but in terms of accessibility and scalability, it seems to be much easier to do, I would say.
Right, Sheetal, brands like Wegovy and Ozempic have actually started doing well. So do you think that the sales of these big brands will be impacted because of the generics?
Some amount of erosion will definitely happen. But then many of the specialty doctors, they prefer to stick to the innovator brand even after patent loss. Reason is innovator molecules are 97% closer to the body components. So the efficacy, the side effect management is relatively better with these products. Branded generics are more of the synthetic type, wherein, the mode of action is the same, but not necessarily the other aspects like efficacy or side effect control may not be the same as that of an innovator. If you see, obesity is a condition which is a cosmetic and a lifestyle condition. So I think majority of the patients can definitely afford a little expensive medication. So, the shift is definitely going to happen, but then the doctors who prefer innovators would stick to innovators for as many patients, at least the patients who can afford them.
Absolutely. So, Dr. Kovil, you work with companies. Companies do come to you. You also are an important point where you guide the patients. Two advices each from your point of view, sitting where you are, or two for companies, what they should be doing and they should not be doing, and 2 points of advice on what patients should be doing and they should not be doing.
I think because the back-end capability is most important, because as Saurabh had earlier said that the liraglutide generic experience wasn't so good. If the product is good and the product gives meaningful advantage to patient at a cheaper rate, then you really don't need any kind of front-end marketing, because the science is very much proven here.
Right. And a word of advice for the patient, sir.
So one is that patients need to understand that these are medicines which need to be prescribed. They cannot be starting this without a valid prescription and after a proper evaluation. But I think the doctors, if they engage the patient in the right way, and we talk about meaningful weight loss and better metabolic control, and that is what the patient should know. And patient should go and get himself evaluated and use the drug.
Right. And hopefully the regulatory intervention that we just saw a couple of days ago, that also plays a role, because we'd really seen so many direct appealing ads all across. That also probably needs to be a little tempered. So
Absolutely
I think
true. Absolutely
right.
true.
Right. So wonderful having all of you in this very important conversation. Sheetal Sapale, Dr. Saurabh Jain from Indegene, Dr. Rajiv Kovil, Mr. Saurabh Agarwal from HAB Pharmaceuticals, and Dr. Vijay Charlu. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank
you so much, Vikas.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thank you,
inviting
Vikas.
us. Thank you so much.
The semaglutide patent cliff is a test of India's pharma maturity. Of the 50 brands that will be launched, maybe 5 will last. The winners won't be decided by price alone, but by cold chains, patient support, and clinical credibility. The statin moment for metabolic care is here. The question is, who's actually ready for it? That's it for today. You were listening to this episode on The Morning Brief. It was produced by Anirban Chowdhury, sound designed by Rajas Nayak. A new episode of The Morning Brief drops every Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, wherever you get your podcasts. Stay tuned and keep listening.